Welcome to On the Trail with Isaac Peltz. I hope you are all having a great day today. I have Celeste Trianon with me, an incredible activist in Montreal, studying a law degree at UDM right now. Are you done your law degree?
You're not graduated, yeah.
Graduated a law degree in June, I would assume then.
Technically July, but I finished all my classes in April, so I don't.
Well, congratulations on graduating. That's a huge deal.
Thank you.
A great writer who has been working in the community with trans people, LGBTQ people, and working as an activist for years. Someone who is brave, who I think anyone who knows has the utmost respect for. So I really want to dive straight into this, as probably 100% of you who are listening to this know already. On Saturday, August 9th, 2025, there was a protest against Fierté Montréal, Montreal Pride, for the fact that they said that what is happening in Palestine is a genocide, and then invited a Zionist group to march in the parade with them, as well as the over-corporatization of the Rad Pride. And this protest has been going on since 2023. It is called Rad Pride, and it is something that Celeste has been to every year for the past 3 years. So I'd like to start off with 2023. Could you give us more context about what has happened and how it was in 2023, 2024, and all the way through Saturday?
Absolutely. So 2023 was really a year of what I call awakening for the trans community locally. The biggest shift I've noticed in the community that year was, first and foremost, the rise in anti-trans protests. So we had the first few anti-trans protests in Quebec happened in April that year under the form of anti-drag protests, but we all know it's code for anti-trans. In the face of all of that came the first Rad Pride, which is also organized in the face of Fierté Montréal, just actually not, being sufficiently connected to community and really needing a radical alternative pride, which really stands up for community. And the thing was that first year, things were fine. I don't believe anyone get tear gassed. I did not get tear gassed myself. It was a wonderful, wonderful event.
You guys walked through the village?
Yeah, but instead of walking from the west like we tried this year, it's walked from the east. So basically entering from Papineau Station and walking westwards. I recall us going all the way up to where this year's Rad Pride got brutalized, doing a circle through Maisonneuve and then going back down to St. Catherine and then walking eastwards. And I only really quit when the first, the first warnings of the cops and planning to disperse press were going to take place, which was at least a good hour and a half after the protest begins. You can tell a lot longer than this year for sure. Overall, I'd say even for the level of radicalness the protest was, I'd argue similar, maybe a little bit less so. I'd argue not as many folks had their pink balaclavas on, nor did they have helmets, because back then it wasn't, quite as commonplace for the SPM to brutalize queer protesters.
Yeah, it's gotten really bad, particularly this past year.
That, it really was, more chill, but more so visually than anything else. Because I will say, I feel a lot of the differences between 2023 and 2025 is people needing to protect themselves from police brutality, because unlike before, nowadays, all the queer pressers I know, they have to expect police brutality, which is why they come with helmets, why they come with balaclavas, why they come, with tear gas masks and all of that. It's because it's in response to police brutality and not for any other reason, I argue.
So people in 2023 weren't getting destroyed by the police. In 2024, was there arrest? Was there violence?
Yeah, there was violence, and it was actually the first time ever I got tear gassed. It was Rad Pride 2024, August 10, 2024. We're also marching in from the east, but the cops started charging. I remember as I was I was near the front of the protest, and the cops started charging on a group of queers with a reinforced, wooden banner, I believe in the front left flank of the protest, and eventually that just led to the police just charging and starting to deploy tear gas fairly indiscriminately in the village. I remember there were people on different terraces in the village, primarily gay men just hanging out there, were wondering what the hell was going on. And then so I personally caught tear gas and ended up having to pretty much run from the press at that moment because I was not prepared for getting gassed. I left the press then. I think I stayed maximum 30 or 40 minutes at Rad Pride last year. And I ended up heading off and grabbing myself a poutine for dinner. That was fun, but
after getting tear gassed, you deserve a poutine.
Yeah, but the press was what ended up staying. Some still stayed and basically transformed Rad Pride into a little dance party, which from what I could tell from like footage I saw online, went fairly well. It was absolutely not violent. It was just a bunch of radical queers dancing to good tunes.
Okay, and so this year you arrive, and did you
This
get?
year,
Did you,
I decided
yeah,
to stay at the outside of the protest, mainly
yeah.
just to document police brutality because I knew that it'd be
Everyone
too
knew.
high risk for me to go inside, knowing the risk of getting brutalized yet again. So I was just watching from a distance, with my phone camera, just trying to document primarily the actions of the SPVM, etc. I arrived about like half an hour in advance, and already then there's a massive presence of riot cops all around Place Yanmai, which is reference to the west of the village and south to the east. I think there are at least like 100 or 150 riot cops half an hour before the protest
There was
began.
maybe 150 protesters. There was
Yeah,
essentially 1-to-1 for police and protester.
pretty much. And also some bike cops and other cops, of course, but like definitely in terms of riot cop presence, it was for me at least, it was very much a visual record.
Mm-hmm.
And so I installed myself more to the north of the protest when I saw I saw protests coming in through Maisonneuve and then turning south on Saint Hubert. I just eventually, went near the edge of the protest, just north of where the crowd was. And this year they were completely surrounded by banners. It's very much like I could tell folks were prepared for police brutality. And everyone had like helmets, balaclavas, other forms of protection in order to protect them from the police, I'll say that way. And there's also a lot of photographers. Like I think in 2023 there was maybe like 2 or 3 photographers. I also made sure to take quite a few photos myself. I think this year there are easily like 10 or 15 photographers because I think a lot of people expected there to be violence this year.
Right. And what was the atmosphere of people who were in the back? Because I was in the front filming and stuff. So
It was
what was the atmosphere?
similar, I'd argue. It's pretty similar, just fairly radical, but I'd argue still pretty peaceful. Like, I think one thing, I'd say is maybe some people could perceive a group of people in pink balaclavas and helmets as violent, but that is perception. That is fear of them. They're not actually violent. They're just dressed up in a way that makes you think that they're violent.
Mm-hmm.
I'd argue it's the same thing as, a lot of other things, like, for example, anti-homeless or anti-black prejudice.
Mm-hmm.
It is precisely the fear of the other here.
Right.
I think that's really what led to the police charging forward so quickly this year.
And so I'm sure you've seen the video that I released of them walking forward and throwing the first punches, right? How did you react when you saw that?
Dashing down from the north, it was they're running easily at sprint pace, knocking on their shields like almost in a way to intimidate with their the shields and the batons just bang 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 bang. SPM boosh 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 boosh. Very classic SPM move, not gonna lie.
1, 2, 3, bouge. 1, 2, 3, bouge is what they were doing.
Pretty much.
Walked towards the protesters.
There was like maybe a line of like 15 or 20 riot cops at the corner of Maisonneuve and Saint Hubert, prepared just for charging in. And eventually I ended up, going to different. I ended up having to eventually remove my vehicle because like I was initially gonna prepare like a sound system for the protest this year, but those plans fell through. So I ended up, instead just relegating myself mostly to like documenting and photographing the press instead. So after that, and like after I saw the pressers, just starting to head north because they were not allowed into the village, I ended up, driving off like a few blocks away just to make sure I wouldn't be too illegally parked. And as I was coming back to the protest, I saw the contingent marching east on St. Catherine, right at the level of around Berries. Just walking there was like, it was still seemed pretty peaceful then. And eventually the protesters came to a halt in front of the Fierté Montréal sign, the Fierté Montréal arch in front of the village where their stage was. For context, Montreal Pride, the Fierté Montréal, they had a smaller stage right at the west point of the village. It's called the Scène de Watteau, which was basically a bus has been repurposed into like a mobile stage with like a low stage area around it. And what I felt happened then, and what for me was so obvious, were that the cops were protecting that stage in particular.
Interesting. Why?
I feel like I felt like the cops were afraid that protesters would throw themselves against Fierté Montréal or otherwise attack Fierté Montréal's property, which once again brings me back to the whole idea of police protecting property versus protecting people.
And the plan was to just march to the village peacefully, and then just kind of wave flags, make some noise, and then kind of hang out and dance.
At least from what I could tell, that was the plan. And it seemed, it seemed to be a fairly, radical, but relatively speaking, peaceful plan as well, Then for a first timer who would come to such press, I don't think they'd expect to get brutalized so quickly, especially within the span of 20 to 30 minutes. And for context, the bus was parked in the middle of the street. Yeah. So I think that might be one of the main reasons the cops really did not want the press to march eastwards into the village. Because the bus was parked in the middle of the street, kind of like perpendicularly to on St. Catherine, which basically blocked off the middle of the street, making it tougher. You'd have to walk around onto the sidewalks in order to cross the stage. So,
how has your reaction been to the media coverage on this? I've seen 4 articles on it: Journal de Montréal, Radio-Canada, City News, and CTV, and they all essentially repeated the slogans of the police, the statement of the police, without interviewing protesters. How has your reaction been?
It's honestly disgusting. And when you see the videos and the photos that have been taken by different folks, like I took a few cell phone videos of much press, some of which I've shared. I know William Wilson has posted some of the, I'd argue some of the most iconic protest photos of recent years in Montreal on his Instagram page. And it's really been, in a way, telling. It's telling when you see photos of literal babies getting tear gassed, bystanders getting tear gassed. I mean, it's not the first time I've heard of this. It was 6 protests in the last 366 days, ranging from Rad Pride last year to Montreal Pride this year, having queer protests that have been targeted, which have been tear gassed by the police. Yeah. So 6 times in 366 days. It's nonsense.
It is nonsense. Yeah.
And when you think about it, of course, it's just so inappropriate to just repeat police messaging without trying to actually get the information about things. It reminds me a lot of, say, the coverage after Trans Day of Vengeance, which was, created in a way as a response to, police protection of anti-trans and fascist protests in general, which has been quite a recurring pattern, I'd say, over the last year or two especially. And how all the reporting on the Trans Day of Vengeance here was focused on one queer getting arrested instead of, the violence that trans people face in their day-to-day. I've seen on social media, video clips of trans women being subjected to attempted murder in our streets, in this village itself. I recall there was an attempted murder here, just at least maximum 1 or 2 months ago in the village. And yet this is what the cops will do. They'll happily just spew a narrative about a protest and make this narrative the official one, because of course it's sanctioned by the SVM. When instead journalists like yourself, like William, our colleagues in the link, were on the ground, were very much attacked by the police themselves. How their voices go unheard. It's just blatant journalistic unintegrity.
Yeah, it's a lack of integrity. It's interesting though. I mean, I had to search for the articles that I found. The only one that was kind of upfront was JDM, Journal de Montréal. Which makes me think that the ones that the others wrote did not get almost any attention. And then you think about the fact that my videos have gotten 200,000 views together. William's photo has 100,000 views. I'm wondering if the narrative kind of was won by social media, because I don't think those articles got very much traction online. What do you think about that?
I'd argue so to an extent, because in a way, mainstream media will still grab a lot more attention with different groups who are outside of our communities, who might not necessarily be connected to, queer, not just queer people in general, but queer mobilization efforts and attempts to combat anti-queer, anti-trans, etc. hate. So what I'm seeing is, of course, trans and queer community in Montreal and beyond being outraged about this, just ask themselves, what the fuck is going on? That's what I felt. That's what so many other people I've seen in the community have felt as well. That's messages I've seen repeated by folks say at Rad Pride, which organized an alternative to Montreal Pride Parade on the same day, as well as different colleagues, comrades, etc. elsewhere in Canada. Say, for instance, the Trans Rights YEG in Edmonton, who I've previously collaborated with. So I'm just saying, community is angry about this. We're up in arms about this. For us, it is a repeat, once again, of historical instances of police brutality against queer people, whether that be trucks, sex garage, or other such, raids by the SPVM in historical times.
I know you can't speak for the whole community, obviously, but how is the community in general, in your point of view, feeling after Pride weekend with Wild Pride and Rad Pride?
I think a lot of folks are very much, a lot of folks feel refreshed. A lot of folks feel like there is hope, especially with Wild Pride this year has presented itself to be a full-blown, I wouldn't even say alternative Pride, but really a full-blown Pride on its own, which is able to organize, Pride events, parties, fun events, things made by and for community, which truly takes into account the community's values, not just of inclusion, but of solidarity and the defense of human rights and dignity. So that's something which I really felt, occurred this year. People have hope for the future. People seeing, that an actual good Pride is possible.
Do you feel that people have been feeling there's no hope for a little while now?
Yeah, well, at the level of Montreal Pride, yeah, absolutely. Like so many comrades I know, they've been organizing for years now to try to get Montreal Pride to budge a bit. I'm thinking most notably of comrades at Montreal, at the Montreal, at Independent Jewish Voices Montreal, as well as the Collectif Constanti, who have been fighting for over 600 days of Israel committing genocide in Gaza, let's say that way, to get Montreal Pride to say something about the genocide. But it's like it's like trying to squeeze juice out of a rock, It's impossible. And then as soon as the backlash hit, it took them 5 days to reverse course. And that just shows who Montreal Pride, who mainstream Pride's priorities are. So people are angry about Montreal Pride, and rightfully so. And people feel that there's no hope, which is one of the main reasons, actually, that this year folks have really poured their hearts and souls into creating a different Pride, one which actually responds to the fact that Pride is not just about inclusion, but also about human rights and dignity. Yet,
did you hear about the police brutality on the protesters at Corporate Pride?
Of course I did, and of course I am not surprised.
Yeah, so what happened with that?
So I was not there myself. Mm-hmm. I wasn't neither photographing nor participating in that action, so I cannot. So I'm going to be just repeating things with the grapevine.
Yeah, okay.
But just from the photos I saw, it's photos of police officers attacking queer protesters as soon as they stepped in, and apparently there were cops who were on standby, just ready to shove queer protesters out of the way as soon as any sign of disruption would take place. I think overall, this pattern of police defending Montreal Pride specifically, this was a pattern I spotted last year at the disruption of Montreal Pride, which I was not part of, but I was there pretty close nearby since I was marching with Hilem that year, marching with Hilem and the Hilem, Munarat, and the Independent Jewish Voices contingent.
So that's an Arabic.
So Hilem is a group for Hilem and Munarat are both groups for Arabic speaking queers in the city.
Cool. Okay, thank you.
So I was marching with them, and it just came up that folks disrupted the protest and they got brutalized by the cops, and it just makes me think it's just reminiscent of last year. It's a pattern. It's a pattern now that I believe it's an established pattern now that Montreal Pride collaborates with the cops, of course, and the cops collaborate with Montreal Pride to make Montreal Pride happen, but also to make sure that disruptions to Montreal Pride doesn't happen.
Do you
want
feel
your Pride to be a very certain vision of inclusion, I'd argue. A very certain vision of universal inclusion, which has no values. It's spineless in a way.
Do you feel that Corporate Pride is entirely devoid of good? Or do you feel that there's some things that could be, taken from it that are positive?
I really wish, that good values could be something that could be shared without necessarily, so much amounts of corporate sponsorship, I'd say that way. I know it's possible. There's so many queer-owned businesses, queer-owned initiatives, which would benefit so much from the limelight here. And of course, it's also something which absolutely can benefit from a more significant budget. So many community centers depend on it. So many initiatives need so much. But at the same time, I'd argue that Wild Pride is a sign that you don't need a high seven-figure budget in order to make Pride happen. Wild Pride is being organized on at least, I'd say 200, 300, if not 500 times less budget than Montreal Pride, has still been able to pull off, I'd say. Those events are definitely, some of the events are smaller in scale. It absolutely still is a Pride made by and for the people, which still is wonderful. So I'd say there's absolutely some stuff which we could benefit from that I wish, some of the folks from Corporate Pride could just hop on over, to say Wild Pride, especially for example, just really pushing for good values, especially, and encouraging like local queer and small businesses, thinking of especially ones that actually actively serve the community and do practice some forms of mutual aid even in some cases. But I'd argue we can also make do without the money, Also, I know like Montreal Pride probably could not happen without, say, the amounts of sponsorship money it gets from, say, TD or TD or Loto Quebec, which are their two biggest sponsors. It absolutely is possible to organize a festival without that amount of money,
Yeah. Do you think that Pride is able to remove itself from politics like they've tried to do? Or do you think Pride is innately something that is going to have politics?
I mean, I know it's a common will with a lot of like just queer and trans people overall. They want their identities to be depoliticized, and they want it to be something which is universally understood as human rights and human dignity and all that. But the unfortunate truth is that there's no way around the politicization of queerness, especially when such a huge, portion of the population just wishes to eradicate us entirely from society. It's going to be impossible to depoliticize Pride, at least I'd argue for them, not just the foreseeable future, but maybe like I'd argue in our lifetimes. So I'd really say, as much as like it might be a pipe dream for some to depoliticize Pride, I do not believe it's possible. I believe it really is going to take, people actually, if people want to depoliticize Pride, they're going to need to take political action first to make it something that can be taken for granted. Because right now, it absolutely ain't.
In 2017, it was statistically the least hate crimes, the least violence towards trans and LGBTQ people in history, in Canada at least. And we are seeing a rising trend of hate crimes against trans people and a rising trend of anti-trans rhetoric. How can we improve that? How can people fight back against that and change society to be more accepting and willing to work with trans people?
I'd argue that the biggest thing here is really just denouncing hate in the day-to-day context. That's one thing I'd really say it needs to be checked on. Denouncing that and really de-radicalizing people from conspiracy theories about most notably trans people, but also just in general, like conspiracy theories at large, because so much of the anti-trans movement in Canada is, in a way, the follow-up of the Freedom Convoy, the follow-up of like other far-right movements, because it absolutely is, it absolutely has the same roots, which is not believing in reality, not believing in science, and not believing in human rights anymore. So really, you gotta denounce transphobia the same way you denounce misogyny, racism, or other forms of hatred in day-to-day life. Not just that, you need to make sure there are consequences for hate as well, which right now, it seems that there's more consequences for trans people attempting to protect themselves from hate than the folks actually, dishing out hate.
You get your ass whooped if you try to protect trans people.
Some fuck concert in Montreal where there's a counterpress who got arrested by the cops for eating snacks on fucking church stairs, whilst people actively spreading fascist rhetoric. Of course, they benefit from freedom of speech to some extent, but they basically are completely spared from hate speech laws because the police are protecting them cover, which means that hate speech basically never gets. Hate speech laws are practically never enforced unless the cops want to enforce it. One thing we need to also talk about is this asymmetric enforcement of criminal law in particular.
Yeah, and talk to me about it.
It is oftentimes, I'm thinking, for example, of how, anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Palestinian hate crimes have been so, it just it's pretty much never investigated. It's pretty much never, brought to attention. Whilst, say, for example, other, say, crimes, quote unquote, that are committed, against, say, Zionist groups, or even also, I'm just saying that as an example here, are get almost instant attention by police officers. I'm thinking, for example, of how, like, for example, even protest chants have been policed. Like, for example, in the UK, say, like, Bob Dylan's chants against the IDF were instantly policed by police officers and led to numerous cancellations, whilst I think the first instance of, like, anti-Palestinian racism leading to hate crime charges have been able to track down in Canada occurred this year, more than a year in after the genocide has begun.
Right. Something that people often leverage, and I would love for you to speak to it, is it's a common thing to hear from people on the right. Well, if you, a queer trans person, were in Palestine, they would not accept you. So why would you dare to support them? So can you answer those people? It's not really an argument, just so you guys know.
No,
But I want Celeste to actually answer it, so we have it like, here's a good answer. Have a nice day.
one of the most fundamental principles of our world, of planet Earth, is human dignity. It's a principle that every person has a fundamental right as a human being to live their lives in dignity, to be respected for who they are, to be given opportunities, and to just have an opportunity to thrive. That is one of the foundations of both international human rights law as well as like just human rights frameworks in general. And that's one thing, that I'd argue, has held our world together in many ways, and which is being destroyed by Israel right now. It is the principle that every person has the right to dignity. And that is something which we're absolutely seeing with like Israeli apartheid, differential treatment of Palestinians, and more recently, the full-blown genocide of Palestine in Gaza. Seeing how that is happening, there very much is a connection here, and the connection is human dignity. The connection is the very fact that we, as human beings, ought to respect each other as living creatures deserving of our lives.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that the question isn't whether we'd be mistreated. The question is, these are humans, and we're going to fight for them.
Absolutely. And that should be the basis for everything.
Everything.
This road. That's also why, so many queer and trans people fighting for folks, fighting decolonial battles everywhere. You're fighting for indigenous people on Turtle Island, fighting for migrant rights here, fighting for the rights of people in, say, Sudan, Congo, Haiti, and other countries are, some of the more direct current victims of colonization. It's all about human dignity at the end of the day.
Now, Canada is doing better than most countries, most Anglosphere, Western European type nations for LGBTQ rights, to the point where our Prime Minister hung a pride flag at the Parliament at the beginning of June. However, hate crimes and anti-trans rhetoric are still on the rise in Canada. How do you perceive the future of LGBTQ rights in Canada, and what can be done to push the government to improve them?
Honestly, I'm fairly pessimistic right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, for instance, of how some folks say in Alberta right now will, at the beginning of the school year, end up being forced to not even talk about their transness in school, because if their teachers are made aware of it, the teachers will then be forced to out said trans kids to their parents. And I think more and more in Canada, especially if, say, Alberta's Bill 26, it's Jennifer McCarran, ends up standing in court somehow. I'm just thinking about that. It's going to end up creating an increasingly divided nation where people are going to end up becoming internally displaced, trying to flee anti-trans legislation. That's something that's already happened in the U.S. There's a report last year that apparently 8% of the U.S.'s trans population has already fled to a different state in order to either continue benefiting from gender affirming care or more protected legislation for themselves. And just thinking about it, these are internally displaced people. That's one step removed from being a refugee. And we're not talking about it. That is what's happening. I believe it could easily happen in Canada as well. And if, say we end up getting like conservative feds are even worse than Pierre Poilievre, we could easily be in for a treat that's even worse than what's going on, say, in the UK right now. And I'll say, even then, cannot just trust that a non-conservative government's going to do a good thing. Say UK, they're governed by a Labour Party. They're like, you think that they're doing good right now, but no. They've gone on a full-blown crusade against trans people to the point where people are actively forming exile networks of trans folks fleeing said country. And that's something I'm afraid could end up happening eventually to the entirety of the Anglosphere, not just in the US and the UK, but here as well. We've never been immune to efforts by, I'd argue, contemporary colonizers, contemporary, Christian nationalists and white nationalists who are attempting to get rid of trans people as part of their white nationalist, settler colonial projects, attempting to, reshape civilization in their vision of what a far-right society should be like. I argue more and more it's something that's becoming increasingly prominent in Canadian politics. You have Alberta's USP increasingly dabbling in independence politics, primarily as a means to further a far-right agenda. You have the BC Conservative Party, which has basically is a far-right version of their former, of the former BC Liberals. But even then, it's not far-right enough for certain of their MLAs who've gone to create even more to the right parties. And we're seeing the Overton window shift at record speed here in Canada. 5 years ago, I'd imagine Quebec's prison policy would have been unthinkable. Yet here we are. And that's what I'm saying, here. It's that Anti-trans hate has no borders. And if we keep on letting, hate become increasingly prominent elsewhere in the world, we'll be equally vulnerable to it here.
Cool. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we go?
Maybe there's a few things I'd add,
Please.
Also just saying, I want to remind folks that we might not exactly be safe legislatively speaking, because one thing which I think a lot of folks have not realized is just how much, Canada has no legal protections for trans people whatsoever. We may, of course, have the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In Quebec, you have the Quebec Charter as well. But both of these laws contain non-standing clauses, basically exit clauses that allow government to say, by simple majority, we're going to violate the rights of trans people and you can do nothing about it. So I'll just say, we are absolutely vulnerable to the risks of the tyranny of the majority here in Canada. We're absolutely at risk of getting targeted in this way. And to those who think that we are protected here because we have the law on our side, you're wrong. Just look at what's happening in the US right now. Judges are purposely, going out of their way, trying to interpret 100-year-old texts specifically in ways that might, be completely farcical when taken as a whole, but it's designed specifically to advance a far-right white Christian nationalist agenda. And it's something which absolutely could be replicated here as well. Something which could absolutely happen here as well. And something I'm going to say, it's so damn important, is that we are not safe here. We're not safe here unless we fight back.
Thank you, Celeste, so much for hopping on a call with me and explaining all this. I really appreciate it. Where can everyone find you?
You can find me on my website at celeste.lgbt. It's a pretty cute domain name.
It's a really good domain name. That's awesome.
Yeah, otherwise, I'm also Celeste.lgbt on Blue Sky. On Instagram, I'm known as at Celeste Trianon. And same goes for LinkedIn for all the loggers out there, I guess.
Awesome. And as always, sign up to my Substack, sign up to my Instagram, sign up for everything I do, and give me your money so that I can feel good about myself. Have a lovely day.